Ladies and gentlemen, next to me a very experienced from Chamber of Commerce, from the university principal, and also from the professors or lecturers. So I just want to introduce myself. Actually, I'm teaching also in Tongji University, Shanghai, but as a guest professor. I'm not a full professor because I came from industry, BASF. I used to work for a big chemical company. And by the way, we have also, I think, in New Jersey, we have a big office there, right? I visited that place before. Yes, to my personal confrontation, or let's say in my professional life, actually I started as a chemical engineer. I studied in Germany. Before that, I was in Taiwan, and I started in Germany, and I was amazed of the dual education system in Germany, actually. I'm very much happy or appreciate there is such a chance that you can have actually a Realschule, that means more professional, and the other one is the Gymnasium, that is the university curriculum. And I do meet some of my doctor friends in BASF. They started actually from the professional side, skill side, and then at the end they feel much comfortable doing doctorate degrees and even doing research. So Germany has that kind of binary possibilities. Basically, you have these dual systems, but you still can swap to and fro. But that is normally not happening in China, for example. There's no chance that you can swap. Once you are in this line, then you are in this line. You can't change that anymore. So if you are doing the professional things, you are say goodbye to doctors. You will never get a doctorate degree. That's China. What I'm trying to do that here is, no matter how we do the dual education or education, to me, I think each individual is different. This is number one. And secondly, is each individual develops differently. So education is still about a holistic person. It doesn't matter whether he or she is trained in the first place on the skill side, because we do see that children have a little bit different tendency, more unskillful skills, or on the logic thinking. To my children, I have 2 daughters, and really that they have a difference between individual. But still, what you need is actually to create or even build a holistic person. Totalitarian. I don't know how to use that word, but I will I'll try to show that. And the question is, how to do that? I'm skipping all this. I just try to use a yin and yang in Chinese and try to show that basically we're not focusing on any kind of process or individual elements. Actually, the whole 5 elements, or let's say in the human beings, it comes up with your age, with your experience, etc. You are actually living through 5 elements. So I just take one thing. Maybe we start with number 1 is the imitation, because we start always with the imitation. Let me see which this yeah. Imitation. Imitation, you imitate everything. You start from young or small as a child. Once you do that, actually it's a kind of water element. So that helps to go on learning. Learning is like a wood. You have a certain system. Wood, stem, and then you have branch, and that's the wood. Then it goes to teach. Teach is like a fire. Basically, you have to do this, and you are going into that direction, and also the teacher is energetic. They want you to learn everything. Now, the assisting part is actually, or in the transforming, we can call that also, is coaching. Coaching is like earth. And innovation or creation That is metal. So if I say that every one element is transforming, so from imitation, transform to learn, transform to teach, coach, and creation or innovation. So now if you see that there is always assisting something and control something. So what is controlling what? You see that if I start with a fire, who is controlling the fire? Fire is teach. Who is controlling teach? That is water. Water is extinguishing fire. And imitation is actually controlling teach. So you try to teach, but he just imitate. So, or on the other hand, when you are teaching, so, and the best thing actually you do is you just imitate me. Just repeat after me, repeat after me. So the teacher will say that, repeat after me. And you can say that who is controlling from the fire is controlling the metal. That means the fire will melt the metal. So basically, if you have too much teach, you're controlling the creation, innovation. So that gives you the 5 elements. Basically, every human being is going through these 5 elements. Doesn't matter whether you are coming from skills or you're coming from logic thinking. This is what I'm trying to say. To me, dual education is everywhere. I'm 65 today. After BASF, I started actually doing not only chemicals. Nowadays, I'm teaching a little bit in the university, 1/3 of my time, and 1/3 of time I'm still using my capability in the chemical industries. I'm doing some consulting. And the last one, this is actually with these 5 elements. 5 elements is what I learned from Chinese medicine. And this is what I have learned actually in the last 10 years. So why we try to do this at all? Basically, when we say yin-yang, yin-yang, I would like to introduce to you, yin-yang itself, it doesn't have an ending. So it's a dynamic balance, which means you're thinking that we have a yin and a yang. So either this side or that side. Either I'm in the professional skills or I'm in the logic, the doctor degree and all this research. It's not true. Basically, you have to have a kind of crossing and as a dynamic balance. Once I am doing a master degree or doctor degree, I need an internship to learn what is the practical things. On the other hand, when I'm doing permanently with practical issues, then I'm trying to improve my logic thinking or trying to analysis. So yin and yang is never itself. It is always containing the other half. And that is always there. And within this yin and yang going to and forth, there are 5 elements flowing through. So I'm just trying to start with my presentation, a short introduction of Chinese thinking, but I think that is relevant also to the worldwide and also to the dual education. Thank you. Okay, so the second one, we would like to have the Sue. I think Sue, would you please?
Thank you very much. While they're getting started, I was trying to figure out why they asked me to do a presentation in this section. And after meeting Gary this summer and telling him a little bit about my past, I started my career teaching high school, which I did for 17 years. Coached gymnastics, did the cheerleaders, but I set up the AP Calculus program, did everything from teaching students who were going to go work in the local grocery store to students who were going to go on to Georgia Tech and become engineers or go on and become doctors. And one of the things I noticed when I moved from teaching high school to teaching in a community college is that the expectations of teaching were different. In other words, expectations on the students were different. And yet, as I finally tell my faculty, there's only an 8-week difference from the day they step out of the high school and the moment they step on the college campus. And if we think over 8 weeks, they're suddenly going to learn how to be independent learners, we're fooling ourselves. So the hypothesis behind this, or the purpose of this presentation, is to talk about what we need to be doing to ensuring that those that are sitting at the front of the classroom, whether they're high school teachers, the college teachers, the internship, the businesses, is that we're helping the students move through that continuum of learning, because I think it's very important. So, where's my doohickey here? Thanks. So let me start with a little bit. This is the United States. Georgetown University Center on Education did a study and found out by 2020, 65% of the jobs nationwide will require some kind of post-secondary education. Now, that doesn't mean a bachelor's degree necessarily. It's bachelor's degree, it's associate's degree, it's technical training. But it's 65% of the jobs. And the level of post-secondary education, 33% needs college or associate, 23% bachelor's, and 11% master's. And what they observed was that almost all states in the country have a current attainment level below the future required levels. So we weren't achieving the goals. There are 4,500 institutions of higher education in the United States, where they're 2-year, 4-year, public, private, or for-profit. 4,500, and yet we are not able to fill the needs of our workforce. Indeed, and this is why it gets into my institution, the increase in the workforce. Over the next 20 years, or up to 2020, the Hispanic population is the fastest growing workforce in the United States. As a matter of fact, the data point is this: of the 100 new jobs that are going to be created in the next 5 years, 75 of them will be filled by Hispanics. Simply because that's the youngest population in this country, and it's the population that's interested in going to higher education, you know, getting a good job, making a change in their family life. And this shows you a little bit about, in the year 2014, public schools in the United States became majority minority. In other words, 51% of the students in every classroom nationwide are non-white. And that's been a big change for the country, and probably why you read the things on the news that you read. I just think that, personally, that the country's going through a new self-awareness about who it is. I don't know whether this happened when all the Italians came over and the Irish came over, whether we had great gnashing of teeth then, but we seem to be going through the same thing. But at the same time, this is the workforce of the future. So I think the country's having to deal with it and say, okay, if this is the workforce, then what are we going to do? This was a nice data. The Pew Research Center said the millennials and seem to be the most educated, which is great. We're moving along. We're actually educating at a better pace than we were in the past. And then this is an interesting data point, and it's one I threatened to have everyone in my campus tattoo on their arm, and this is why. The blue line are socioeconomic, highest level of socioeconomic, and notice their graduation rate. They graduate at a higher pace than people either in the red line, which is the middle socioeconomic class, and the 17% and the 9%. But here's the data point that's not on here. That green line and the purple line, the bottom two, actually represent 66% of the students that are going to be going to college over the next 5 or 10 years. Basically, put simply, the students that are going to be college over the next 5 to 10 years come from very modest means, and yet our workforce is going to require that they have college or higher, some college or bachelor's degree in order to fill the workforce. So we have a problem to solve. By the way, they also come from very modest means. My campus is a perfect example of that. The average family income of the students on my campus is $60,000. It's actually more like $45,000, which means they are immigrants or children of immigrants, and their degree is going to make a big difference in their family. Then, of course, we have the lovely problem that other countries don't have, in that the blue line is the cost of private education, the green is the cost of public education, and at the top you've seen what's happened to family incomes, that's gone down. So families are less able to pay, and yet the cost of going to college has gotten to be more expensive. So the business model doesn't seem to be working in the United States. No surprise. But we're working on it. And then we talk about, and this is important, I serve on the NCAA Board of Governors. And one of the things we have observed, and we find this with our athletes who graduate, they will tell you, even if they went pro, what made a difference in their lifetime earnings was their college degree. So college degree students and people who graduate from college will certainly make at least $1 million more Well, here it's $2.2 million more than their peers who don't. So it's important to get the degree. So a little bit about my own institution. We're a very diverse institution. We do not have a majority. I am 50% Hispanic, but my Hispanic students are from every country in the hemisphere. I am 23% black, but the blacks come from the southern part of the state, southern part of the country. They moved up after slavery. And we have people that are from South America as well as from Africa. And then I have Asian students who are from every country, China, Vietnam, Japan, India, Pakistan. They're from everybody, which is fabulous. We started as a training school for teachers, but today we're a much more comprehensive institution. We have nursing, we have security studies, we have business, we have music, dance, and theater, arts. And here's the diversity. And this is the diversity of the city in which I work. We are the second in the country. The diversity is pretty high. The cultural diversity, we're number 1. So we've done quite well. And my campus reflects that, which is kind of cool. What it does, though, in the classroom, it makes the classroom a very interesting place to have a conversation. If you have ever had a classroom full of people from other countries, the way they think, every other person has a different way of approaching life, which is fabulous. But you have to be patient enough to let that experience happen in the classroom. By the way, this is true in the high schools here also in Jersey City. So let's talk a little bit about dual enrollment studies. This was a report from a long time ago. It said about 71% of the high schools and 51% of the post-secondary institutions permitted high school students to take college courses. Why is that important? When I taught high school back in the dark ages, we were using, I don't think we even had calculators back then. That's how old ago it was. We had students at my high school who would take a college-level course. And they did that mostly to kind of get ahead. They wanted to get the college experience while they were in high school. You can either do it on the high school campus, you can have them drive to the college, or they can do it as an experiential experience. There were about 813,000 students taking this during the 12-month school year. This was in 2005, so that's a long time ago, and I'm certain that that number has increased significantly. In that time, and I was involved in one of these, Bill and Melinda Gates put in a lot of money to create something called early colleges, and I'll talk a little bit about that, early college high schools, in just a minute. There was a review of the literature that found there wasn't a whole lot of evidence that students in high school who were enrolling in college contributed to their college access or academic success. However, and I'll show you in just a second, in another study it showed you kind of who took the courses. The important things that was important to doing a dual enrollment class was the authenticity of the experience. Was the instructor, was the teacher actually someone who understand a college curriculum and how to teach from a college perspective? And then the integrated student supports. Did they get tutoring? Did they get mentoring? Did they get help to be successful in the classroom? So this is a study that someone did from Oregon. They realized if everybody that took the dual enrollment classes, 90% of the students passed the course. However, the people who were taking the courses, they were predominantly white, they were women, and they were non-minority, and they were not low income. Translated, the graph I showed you earlier about the students who really need to be taking advantage of this weren't necessarily the students that were doing that. And that's something that, again, we want to try to address in our own school system. Let's talk about dual education specifically in New Jersey and how that fits. There are high school students who will do apprenticeships. There's a company called Eastern Millwork. It's actually a company from Germany where students learn to do really high-end millwork that you might see at Lincoln Center down in New York City. They don't need to go to college, but they need to go and do this apprenticeship. And the students who graduate, finish, and get hired by Eastern Millwork usually want to go get a degree after that, which is a good thing. Summer research projects. We have high school students on my campus every summer working in the science labs with my college faculty and the college students. So there's an integrated experience. In some instances, we've been able to turn this into college credit for them. In some instances not. They just want to have the experience of doing research. College level courses start in the high school. We do that in a number of ways. We have one school called Innovation High School where the students who finish high school could have finished as much as 2 years towards their college. I have another school I work with, Arlington High School, where the same thing happens. If you point to a school down the street from us in Bayonne, which is where the longshoremen settled years and years ago, The students there predominantly just want to take business courses. So we give them some introductory business courses, sort of a flavor of what college is like. What this does for the students predominantly, though, is gives them a little bit of a leg up on courses that they can get transferred into the college, so they don't have to take as many courses in college, or they can take other courses in college and end up with maybe 2 majors. Internships for high school students, that is happening more and more. Our chamber will have internships for students, as well as the mayor does that a lot. I actually have on my campus students who come from a Cristo Rey school, and this is the model there. None of the school, this is a private school, private Catholic school, and none of the students pay tuition. I have to pay to have a student come to my campus 1 day a week. But that student gets a free tuition at this high school, 4 days of high-level instruction, and then the 5th day they end up on my campus and we have them doing work in certain departments. So when they finish high school, they've worked, and they're much more successful in their college careers. And then prior learning assessments. We do this a lot. New Jersey has a method that they use through the American Council of Education, where if you come to us with some experiences, we can measure if that counts towards college readiness or college career or college courses. So the question I have for the dual enrollment, and the dual enrollment I'm thinking about here is simply, if I want to teach a college level class on high school, and I also want to think about what that continuum is of learning from high school to college. What do we need to be teaching? What's the goal of the learning to be accomplished? How we learn to be more nimble, more integrated in our thinking, and so that we're helping to define what the future needs are, and then how do we accomplish that? I'll give you a simple example. So mathematics is my background, and I'll never forget the debate. So I taught AP Calculus, which was a college level course on my high school. I did the curriculum like they told me to. We integrated, students were engaged. I go to college, I'm teaching in a community college. We are having huge debates. Should we make sure every student can prove the fundamental theorem of calculus? Should they prove that? And if they should, who should? Does the history major need to have that? Or does the engineer need to have it? And then, so what do you put in the curriculum that's relevant? And if you take it out, then what goes in its place? And what is today important? If you ask my business dean what he thinks is a critical math class, he would tell me statistics, because he says that's far more relevant than some of the stuff he calls it, you make me take the students through in the calculus course. So I have to think about what's relevant and what's important, and the way I think we find it is we go to the industry and we ask, what are the important skills that you need? What is it you want students to understand? And the dumb analogy I give a lot is I was in high school long enough ago when I learned to take a square root by hand. You might know how to do it. But it shows your age. When you know, I remember this, did you know how to do it? So, and then I think to myself, okay, what did it accomplish? So I achieved some good thinking, and I understand what a square root is, but did I need to go through all that to understand that? And were there other things I missed out on? Back at the time, that was important. So then how would you accomplish it? And the second thing I want to talk about is like, what do we do to make sure that what happens in the high school and what happens in the college is seamless? So the goal of the learning, it's a continuum from primary to secondary to higher education, professional training, and certification. I was involved in P20 initiative in Atlanta, Georgia, where they wanted to take the math curriculum from kindergarten all the way through graduate school and say, okay, how do you do this so it's a continuum, so that the student walks out of the high school and when they take their first college level course, they're successful. They're not frustrated. So how do you make that happen, right? And it's about the level of thinking and about how you engage learning in the classroom. The importance of understanding what needs to be taught, what pedagogies are most effective. I don't know necessarily that all my faculty nor all my teachers I taught with on the high school are always using the best pedagogies, and how do I motivate them to do that? And what are the most effective for the student? What experience should be taught to ensure maximum learning? Here's another interesting conundrum. So I have a lot of students from other countries, and I will tell you that I have students coming from China. One of the hardest things I have for my students from China is forcing them to stand up and make a presentation. And I force them to do it without another Chinese person. Because I need for them to get out of their comfort zone. Because if they can, they'll be such an asset to some company somewhere, because they have a much more global understanding. But that's just a small example of all the things we have to be attentive to when we teach. The pace of change of information, this is the other problem. I just texted my dean today and I said, you're going to have to move faster than you're moving because curriculum is changing so fast. The needs of society are changing fast. So how do we learn to keep the core that's important and then keep the other moving? Areas like financial technology, data science, bioinformatics, these were all things that when I was going to college didn't even exist. They're new and require more diverse thinking than before. We are finding more of our PhD faculty that are coming to us, our new faculty, already have interdisciplinary doctorates, simply because what they want to do research in required 2 disciplines to kind of get the work done. Technical training, even technical training, just to be much more complex use of technology and critical thinking skills. We find that with our community colleges and the work that they do with aviation. Then you can't forget that. Embedded is a rich diversity of humanities. Diverse learning environments create new opportunities for learning, ways of thinking, and ways of defining values. I just truly believe that this is critically important. And learning to listen to other cultures and other ways of doing problem, I think is a critical thing. And then, for students from the lower socioeconomic groups, it can be a life-changing experience, but they can also fall off the cliff tomorrow if you can't give them the right support. And for our students, a lot of it is financial. So you're homeless, we're going to put you in the residence hall, and you're going to work in the cafeteria because I don't want you to stop going to school. It's important to us. It's been an effective way. So what's the goal of learning? How does it affect dual education? It's an effective way to incorporate the goals of post-secondary education into the secondary experience. Let me talk just for a minute about the Bill and Melinda Gates School that I did at Queens College. So this is a school that starts in 7th grade. When you finish high school, you would have finished an associate's degree. Now here's what they made sure they did. Because that's the way the grant was written, they wanted the student body to be the bell curve of achievement. So I couldn't have everybody at the top end of the achievement. They wanted it spread out. I need to have people from special education all the way up to the brightest minds, and it needed to be diverse. Fortunately, Queens, the borough of Queens in New York City is very diverse. That was an easy thing to check off, and they did it as a lottery. The idea was this. You started them in 8th grade. Starting in 9th grade, they said, what college level course could I possibly teach? They decided Spanish. They felt like teaching a foreign language would be a conceptual thing that students would be able to, and then you moved from there because they wanted to make sure when they finished high school that they had that 2-year degree. And they were highly successful, and well, the grant forced it. But we've started 2 others that we're working on with our local community college. But it really forces everybody to think about what's important, what are you teaching, and how are you teaching it. Mm-hmm. See, I talked about the college campus apprenticeship. Anyway, all these things can help connect from the high school to the college into the business world. You want to make sure the curriculum, talked about that, and I've got to stop talking. These are the modes of learning that we found out. The active learning, I was doing that myself a number of years ago. Problem-based learning is complicated to do. It is complicated to do, but done well, it's a very powerful learning experience. Socratic method, I had a colleague that's how she taught. Everything was a question. Flipped classrooms, guide on the side, not sage on the stage. Finally, this is where it's going to happen. How do you train teachers for tomorrow? And then how do you keep them updated? And then finally, the doctoral granting institutions, are they teaching their doctoral students effective ways of teaching?
Thank you. Wonderful. You keep your time well. You make a marvelous presentation, so I almost forgot about my obligation. So then we ask Mina, yeah? Okay, that's your turn to do that. We like ladies first, and then gentlemen the last. Right, very good. Yeah. Right.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this panel discussion. It's my great pleasure to be with you, and you are coming from education world, I'm coming from business world. I'm representative of Serbian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, but we are a strong partner to our Ministry of Education in implementation of dual model of VET at secondary level. I forgot to take. So I will now present you how we see dual model of education on secondary level of education, and what Serbian Chamber of Commerce and Industry does in this story, and how this cooperation with Ministry of Education how it works here in Serbia. So you can see there are different definition of dual model of VET, but we in Serbia see dual model of VET as a model of education that consists of strong cooperation between schools and companies. For us, it means education on two places. It is possibility for students to get knowledge, to have theoretical classes and practical education at schools, but to have work-based learning within companies. So this work-based learning, it is organized as a process in which students acquire competencies and develop skills by working within companies. For successful dual model of VET, we need enough number of work-based learning places, enough number of companies to support us. We need also companies to be included, to be involved in development of curricula. We need also minimum quality standards for licensing economic entities. We need sources, funding sources. Also, it is important for us to promote this education model to students, to have flexible curricula, and to have strong partnership with other stakeholders here in Serbia. What does everything presented on this slide means? For this number of work-based learning places, it means that it is necessary to have companies willing to offer places for students to teach at the working places. If we want to have companies, it is necessary to involve them in development of curricula, and we do that. We involve them in the first phase of development of curricula. It is called job profile. This is for secondary level of education. I'm not sure how much you are familiar with that process. In Serbia, there is institution that develop curricula, and it is in charge of standard of qualification and curricula. The first part of this standard of qualification is called job profile, and we usually invite companies to define that first part, to define job profile, because learning outcomes depends on well-developed job profile. And for that we need companies. And it means that if company asks for well-educated and skilled labor force, it is important to them to say what they need, what they ask from that labor force to know for good working within company. And also these minimum quality standards for licensing economic entities, it means that we need to accredit companies to check some conditions. It is necessary for companies to fulfill some conditions set up by law on dual education, because it is not every company in Serbia allowed to be included in dual model of education, especially because of safety measures within companies. Also, it is important to promote these profiles to young people, because if we establish everything on a perfect way, we won't have success if we don't have interested students to be enrolled and to be educated in this dual profile. And also we need to have flexible curricula. It means to change curricula on some relative dynamics in according to changes in business sector. You can see that main building blocks of successful VET system in Serbia are company and vocational schools. And also I would like to say, to inform you that we started to develop this model of education at secondary level in 2016, but with support of our partners from Germany, from Austria, from Switzerland. You know that today all these countries have very well developed dual model of education at secondary level, and we use their experiences and also included our experiences in Serbia from the past. Also, according to these experiences and pilot projects, we adopted law on dual education at secondary level in 2017, and this year, based on good results and good experiences at secondary level, this year we adopted law on dual studies in higher education, but we have already achieved some results at the level of secondary education, but concerning this higher education, we still didn't start with any activity in this field, and it will be really a challenge for us to do something in that field. I think that maybe we didn't have this law on dual education, dual study at higher education, because faculties already have established some connections, some links with companies, and they used to work with companies. But and also students are older than 18 years old, which is important for Serbia at secondary level, I think for every country. When we are talking about secondary level, you have younger students, and you need to regulate and to provide them with adequate level of qualitative education. Concerning these results that we achieved at level of secondary education, we now implement 35 dual profile as 3 years or 4 years profiles. We have around 6,000 students. What does it mean? I will say you that there are around 280,000 of students enrolled at secondary level. 170,000 of them go to secondary vet. 110,000 go to gymnasium. It means that of 170,000, 6,000 students go to dual education, dual model of education. It is not a big percent, but it is for us really good success, having in mind the fact that we started the development of this model in 2016. We have support of around 800 companies, and we have 72 schools for vet. Among these 800 companies, SMEs have a dominant role. So you can see in this slide what does it mean to have work-based learning profiles. It means that our curricula consists of two parts. One part is general subjects, the other part is vocational subject. We organize work-based learning for these vocational subjects. It means that we can organize work-based learning for at least 20%, okay, I will be faster, but no more than 80% of the vocational subject. So, the next slide gives you information about some basic elements of implementation of dual education, such as contracts between companies and schools, contracts between companies and students. Also there is remuneration for students engaged in dual education. Here you can see role of my chamber, why chamber is important for this model of secondary vet. I will tell you that we are the biggest association of companies here in Serbia, and membership in our chamber is obligatory. And also what is important, here you can see the reason why we opted for this model of education, because we see dual model of education as a way to revive our industrial production, to maybe obtain higher inward foreign direct investment, to foster entrepreneurship, and etc. On this slide, I present you how many of students go to, but I already told to you how many of them go to secondary vet, to gymnasium and other schools. And this is a slide that presents how, which profiles usually our students that enroll secondary vet opt for. So I wanted to say something more written in my paper, but since we don't have time, thank you very much for the attention.
Very comprehensive. Very good. Okay, so the last one. Oh yes, you want to sit down? Okay, good. No problem. Good. Go ahead.
Well, can I get that? Hello, everyone. I'm Mladen Stamenković from the University of Belgrade, Faculty of Economics. I'm currently the Vice Dean for Research, but my primary role is teacher and researcher, and I want to talk about some issues that we actually started during the conversation we had before the start of this session. And I will start with actually the report you named in your presentation, which is the GIZ report. They say this proportionate share of unemployed people has secondary vocational education. It's one of the first sentences GIZ had why they started this program and the whole thing. And it really is like that. As you will see, the unemployment is the worst within the secondary, people with secondary education, and that's why it makes sense to make a link between industry and these people, especially, not with tertiary, much more secondary. Many countries, there is some research, about this topic, and we have this tracking. Germany is very specific because we will talk about Germany. Germany has a quite early tracking. They do it in 4th year, then they redo it in 8th year. Our first tracking comes at 8th year of schooling with positive and negative consequences of it. We have the issue of inequality, which I would like to start as a topic. I did some research, and this is how it should look like. So the Serbian idea of schooling, this would be some map. So after primary, you go to secondary level of education, which would be gymnasium, which is a tertiary education track, and vocational school, which should go either to skilled work on unemployment, and this is where the big problem is. On the other hand, university goes, of course, this is lower professional work because you don't have any skills. There's a problem. But the idea of gymnasium is to go to university and then into this people you talked about with higher income, and it's true in Western Balkans as well. So I wanted to talk about achievements. We have PISA test, and everybody talks about PISA. PISA is the best. OECD. I don't see anything better than PISA to see what students can do. And this is a research I did several years ago. I wanted to look upon the achievements of Serbian students regarding PISA, but we actually never did, by their methodology, we have never split students in Serbia via educational profiles. So I did, this is part of my paper. Of course, people from gymnasiums, as it turned out to be, they were highly dominant in scores. And then you have medical, artistic, economic, technical, and other type of schools. If you go, now we cannot see it, if you go by a geographical point, then you can see that Belgrade is much better than the other part of Serbia. I won't go into details, but clearly gymnasiums are the best, and people from and Belgrade schools have much better achievements than the rest of Serbia. So what PISA results can tell us that there is a different level of quality between tertiary education student and student going to vocational schools, which means the tracking does its job at 8th grade. People go to vocational education, which is meaningful, and what is interesting, the difference remains between all socioeconomic categories. So whether you follow the lowest socioeconomic group, the difference between the abilities of students is good, so it means the tracking does its job in the 8th grade, which is a good thing to do and to know. When it comes to equality of opportunity, so actually Germany is one of the largest, they have quite big difference between socioeconomic groups, which happens because lower income families push children toward dual education, and they have this big desegregation which happens in Germany right now. That's something like that happens in Serbia, but not such big effect, with not so big effect. In Sweden, for example, reform introduced comprehensive education to, increase both educational attainment, equity, blah, blah, blah. So when it comes to this, I will like to get back to the main point. What's going on with the unemployment rate in this age group, which is rather important for us when we talk about dual education. So if you see, we are in top of Europe. So North Macedonia now, Greece expectedly, and then here comes Serbia, Spain, and Montenegro. So we have quite significant share of unemployed people in the group that is actually affected and can be affected by this dual education. Unemployment rate is very high in Western Balkans. I wanted to somehow, it's 24% compared to only 9.4 in EU. Then graduate unemployment, it's quite better, and this is important. There is significant difference between secondary education people and tertiary education people. And when you look at the share of unemployed and employed, there is always this peak in Western Balkans when it comes to secondary education, which everything speaks in favor that we should focus on this dual education within secondary schools. So when it comes to vocational education in Western Balkans, we have to mention, and especially for people not from here, that Yugoslavia had quite well-developed vocational education. And the problem that we had very good industry, and what happened is the 90s. And during the 90s, during the wars, we lost this touch. We lost the industry, and now it's difficult to get it back. And I think there is, when people talk about dual education, you have to explain them that the root is actually existed. So the whole idea of VET in Serbia was built upon some sort of dual education we had before. Whether it was school-based or work-based, that's a different story, but it existed before. And in the nowadays state, so structural change was driven by privatization, and we lost that link. Now there is this good idea to get it back. What's happening with transition within the upper secondary education? There is research that shows that we have to be careful. So improved labor market outcomes and better wage, then to people who do not progress to university, but that gaps, of course, to people who come to university closes, and the people with undergraduate degree have at the end better expected higher income. There is this research, I don't think I put it, they did, Professor William Bartlett, who actually helped me quite a lot with presentation. There are a couple of his slides I borrowed. He did very interesting research within these secondary educational students. He asked them a simple question: how did you get your job? Mm-hmm. And it turned out that the majority of the response was via some connection with parents, family, or yes, it's relationship. And it shows that it's highly difficult for these people to avoid this obstacle of finding the job. And that's why building this bridge with industry makes sense, to lower this gap, because it's amazing the difference with people with undergraduate diploma. So they ask the same question, and the difference of percentage of the response, I got it because I had some connection. It still exists, of course, on undergraduate level, because this is, in Western Balkans, this is something which happens. It's amazing how big the difference is. And what's going on to returns to vocational education? Of course, here's the USA, show that higher returns to vocational track than general tracks at school, although more recently this wage differential has been reversed, and you talk briefly about what's going on there, and it's, the rise of the cost of education and stuff like that causes it. Of course, we have this research that vet education provides reasonable returns only in countries with well-developed vet systems, and that's one big topic for Serbia, because you have to have strong industry to support it, and that's a question. That's why I think these small steps, not only to push it to 60,000 students, but to have these baby steps with smaller, like GIS did, like you're doing, makes sense much more than invoking it to tertiary education. We talked about that before. I think it's much more meaningful to focus on secondary education, not to raise it to tertiary education, because I'm not quite happy with that idea, because for example, at our university, at our faculty, we do it on our own. We don't need introduction of dual education for us to convince us that we have to have a connection with industry, because modern universities should work that way, and country is not needed. The government is not needed in that direction, but it's very much needed in the secondary education, where the link between vet and industry is lost during the 90s, and I think that's the main issue you have to solve. We lost this connection we had in Yugoslavia. We have really good connection between wet and industry. At the end, educational system in Western Balkans, powerful source of transmission of social exclusion. You have to, at the end, you have to realize that, the issue of equality, you never mentioned it. It's not an issue in America. In Europe, it's much more disgusting, the equality of opportunities and stuff like that. Yeah. Okay, I might be wrong.
No way.
It's the one country that has the highest difference between the very wealthy and everybody else. Of the whole world.
Yeah, I know. That's why I think in Europe, this is issue in Europe much more than it is in America. And really, this is something you're working on, and I think you're on the right track, and you should continue it. When it comes to university reform, and maybe we should leave it for a discussion, because you gave me introduction to it. You talked about, I was writing it because it was really interesting. You said quite relevant things. What is relevant you gave example of mathematics, because we keep forgetting that we're teaching people not for tomorrow, but for 20 years ahead. And, imagine, look at the jobs now and go back in 1991. They're all some programmers of stuff we didn't know existed there. We had now a program, I don't know how it survived, but there was a computer in library that has the program from 1991. And I realized I wanted to change this thing in library, how we do it, because it's obviously outdated. We had a problem because they didn't have export button. They had to manually write something, because it didn't exist. Windows didn't exist. We had it. Incredible how the world changed in 20 years. And
are you finishing that?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
We can
So
start discussion already.
yeah, we can start discussion.
Okay.
So and everybody can jump in and
Okay, because that's a good point.
I think, and I will conclude now.
Curriculum and all this.
Exactly. What do you teach? Because we don't know what will my daughter be in 20 years. She's now 9 months old, so I don't really know what will she do. And I think you mentioned it at the end. I think the answer for mathematics, because we are we are both, as I understood, we are both had mathematical background, but we are not doing mathematics anymore, neither me nor she. I think it's the problem-solving based teaching in this way. And, you know, you don't teach them like algebra, calculus, because there is application that can solve any equation now. And I can just take a photo and I have the solution. And the problem is what to do with it and how to use it in a problem-solving context. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Yeah, wonderful presentation.